104.7 The Cave, Mike the Intern, Jay Stevens, back together again. Dark Side of the Stream, episode 210.
Wow.
This week was my pick, a documentary that just premiered on Max called Yacht Rock, and it is a phenomenal journey into the world of yacht rock and all the geeky soft sounds that Joe and I are very big fans of. Of course, we're both Steely Dan homers, and it all starts and ends with that band, especially according to the guys in this documentary. And at least in my opinion, I agree with them. What did you learn?
I actually learned a lot from this documentary.
I'm sure you did, buddy.
I was not familiar with the yacht rock scene. When I saw a Facebook ad for this documentary coming, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the mother lode. This is when we do our yacht rock band Porn Stash. This is the basis of it, right? Yeah. Well, I learned a lot, and I did learn about how everything came from Steely Dan, basically, and Toto.
Well, and the Toto guys came from Steely Dan. A lot of those dudes worked with them, and the creation of them being studio musicians, it was just another way of the evolution of some of like the Motown players and the Wrecking Crew in LA. It's just again, you talk to when they were talking about working on Thriller later on and how the dudes of Toto are in that, like Quincy was an insanely talented producer, but he also understood that time is money. And when you got guys in there that can literally cut and do those takes in one or two things, that's what you want, right? Steely Dan, they didn't do it that way, man. They would make you do 100, 200, 300
long
takes.
road, yeah.
And I loved how Gary Katz at one point says, you know what? In all those years and all those albums we made, not one time did I ever hear them say, do you know how much this is going to cost us? Not one time. He goes, anytime I ever got brought up, Donald Fagen would just say, it's my money.
Yeah. Well, how do you get all this money, that dude?
Donald Fagen, they selling records, dude. I mean, they came out, like literally were hired as, like at the time, there were record companies that would hire guys to like be a partnership to write songs for their up and coming pop artists. So they'd have a catalog.
But the songs they're writing were too weird.
They kind of have that same thing these days, but it's more akin to just producers that do it all. You know, producers there's like 5 to 10 right now in the world. Every major pop song is based off of these guys and gals that are just, they've shaped it. And it's always been, I mean, you can see like Gary Katz and all these dudes in the mid to late 70s that started forming that sound. And, you know, it just continues on that way, whatever is popular, but they didn't care. And so they were too weird for that. And then just were smart enough to really look at what they had and involve their songwriting as they would go forward. But the story of how it just, I in my mind have always had the term yacht rock, like it was a thing that's always been defined as a genre, but it wasn't that way. It actually started with the web series, and we'll talk about that next.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, 104.7 The Cave. Mike the Intern, Jay Stevens, we're back. Studio. It is Dark Side of the Stream, episode 210, discussing yacht rock on Max. So you hear about, obviously, the beginnings of this term yacht rock being created, I guess, a year before YouTube existed, on a web series called Yacht Rock, which was kind of a joke.
A bunch of comedians, right?
You know, they would, Kenny Loggins ended up working with Michael McDonald on this, and how Michael McDonald was literally on every single one of these records in some form or fashion, whether it was as a co-writer or a vocalist or a keyboard player or whatever. That was part, I already knew Michael McDonald was the man. Like, I already knew that. I already felt that. But it's interesting because you've got two very, very, very talented guys in Donald Fagen and Michael McDonald, right? And Michael McDonald, like, if you and I ran into him and he was here and we were cutting a record or we were doing something and he was here, and I'd be like, Mr. McDonald, would it be okay if you would you like to do some backup vocals? He would literally do it.
You'd call him Mr. McDonald?
Oh, yeah.
No, I go, Mike, yo, what's up, dude? Let's cut some vocals in.
Me.
Yo, we'll be
call me Mike one more time. Anyway, so he'd do it. Hands down. Doesn't care. He's a musician. He just likes to play.
I appreciated how they all admitted so much drug use to write these songs.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Christopher Cross said he was on LSD and writing the words to run like the wind, ride like the wind or whatever.
Yeah. But dude. Again, I thing is, like, the Fagen, the other side of the coin, is a guy who just, it's my show, and if you don't like it, move on. And
he still seems not cool.
Well, he doesn't like that he doesn't like the connotation that his band is literally the forefathers of this yacht rock genre that was created 30 years, 40 years after they did their stuff. He's in the bottom, in his soul, is a jazz musician. Is those jerk jazz musicians that you heard about in the 50s and 60s that would get in knife fights, that would smoking reefers out back of the building, that were the best at their instruments, the best they knew, and they treated everyone like that. And that's how he is. That's how he's always been. And he's never made any mistakes. He's never tried to be something else, and that's fine. And
but I would say embrace it. There's some hair metal guys too that hate the term hair metal. You got to embrace it, man.
You have the dude from Ambrosia that was like at the beginning, I hated the yacht rock term. So like, you're just putting us into this thing. Well, you got Michael McDonald's like, I think it's hilarious.
Yeah,
like, whatever. Good publicity is publicity. You're talking about me.
Now there's yacht rock tribute bands.
Yeah, but it was interesting too. And there was another band that they talked a lot about that I thought that was an interesting thing too, because they were on one end of a spectrum in the beginning of a decade and finished on the other end of the spectrum at the end. And that ride is pretty incredible. We'll talk about that next, and some new yacht rock bands on Dark Side of the Stream on 104.7 The Cave. Mike the Intern, Jay Stevens, we're back in the studio. It's Dark Side of the Stream, episode 210, Yacht Rock on Max. So another band that was big in the yacht rock scene, well, not in the beginning of the career, but towards the end with the Minute by Minute record, and then beyond that, basically after they got Michael McDonald in the group, was the Doobie Brothers. What's interesting is they started out as a band that was literally like the official band for the Hells Angels.
Like a rock band.
Those dudes toured with them. They were their security. They were a rock and roll band. They obviously had a lot of members and they were open to other genres, but that was what they were. By the end of the decade, they're literally in the top 5 of the Doobie Brothers yacht rock songs. I mean, What a Fool Believes is in the top 5 of yacht rock songs of all time, which again, that whole story about how Michael McDonald is at his house, his sister's cleaning his house, and he starts coming up with the dun dun.
Because cleaning the house because Kenny Loggins is coming.
Dun, 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 and he's playing it over and over again. And as he's doing, he's going, and Kenny hears it. And he stops and he looks at his sister. He's like, "Should I play him that?" And she goes, it sounds like he's on a circus.
Too circusy.
And then as soon as he opens the door, he's like, "What were you just playing? I want to hear that." And that's what they wrote.
Dude,
it's amazing.
And that was the basis for like 80 other songs. They showed that. I love that.
Yeah. That rhythm, that feel, what they call like the doobie,
the bounce, the
doobie bounce, which was hilarious. And I thought they did this documentary was obviously well fleshed out, and they did a really good job getting everyone they could. They couldn't get Fagan. They had a phone call with him at the end.
Oh my gosh, what a mean,
Donald
rude
Fagan
guy, dude.
Again, that's how he's always been. Like, if you go back to the 70s and read any very, very limited journal articles about that band, they go out and they say, these guys were such jerks to us. They wouldn't let us talk to them. They hated rock critics, man. They did not. They're like, who are you? You know what I mean? And if you are a guy that feels like you're the best at what you do, songwriting, piano playing, vocals, whatever, and you got some dude who's a journalist coming in and telling you he doesn't like what you make, what are you going to think?
Yeah.
Be like, oh yeah, you go write me a song, and then let's compare. It's like, shut up, dude. But anyway, the one thing that I will give a knock on this thing is that there are actually a lot of bands that exist right now that are still doing this yacht rock thing, that have continued to push the barrier of what that is and still fallen into that category. There is one.
Well, it's like bands that are there's still new bands that are trying to do glam rock still nowadays. They're new, but it's not going to sell like it did then.
No. There is a band out of Sweden. They're called State Cows. They are literally like front to back. I mean, it doesn't get any more yacht rock than those guys, and they're really badass. They don't tour a lot. They just kind of, I think, studio musicians that just do it in Sweden. They speak in English. I didn't even know they were in Sweden until I looked them up. But the one band I wanted to bring up, and I'm going to play a little bit from, is a band that is made up of 2 bands. One is Mother's Gun. They're out of the UK, a soul band. And then another guy who has literally played this guitar player kind of missed. He was, I don't want to say he was born too late.
Yeah, he probably was born too late.
But he's literally played with everyone. His name's Sean Lee, and he's actually from Wichita. But Sean Lee, dude, he's played with, so many different musicians. He's been in Tonight Show bands. He's just done everything. Had his own solo stuff, worked with different people, then eventually hooked up with the guys from Mother's Gun, and they created a new band called Young Gun Silver Fox, which this is their song called Caroline. This album came out 4 years ago, 5 years ago. So good. That's
Yacht Rock. Yeah.
Yacht Rock, baby. And that's, like I said, that album is called In Waves. The band's called Young Gun Silver Fox. Please check them out. That album is a classic. I'm Mike the Intern. That's Jay Stevens. We'll be back with our reviews of Yacht Rock next on 104.7 The Cave. Mike the Intern, Jay Stevens back in the studio one more time. It is Dark Side of the Stream, episode 210, discussing
Yacht Rock, the documentary.
So how many captain's hats would you give this
I go
one?
4, 4.5.
Solid
Yeah.
4. Yeah, solid 4.5, 4. It was good. It was easy. It was 1.
I got a little history lesson. It was good.
Found out about some really good bands, some good songs you might not have known. Again, they make a really good point in the beginning. Like most of these records and stuff were found in the dollar bin, and you can still find a lot of them in the dollar bin because they were very popular, but they didn't last a long time because then the 80s came through and just knocked it back on its head and got to be tougher and all this stuff. And again, a hodgepodge of all kinds of different genres.
And Image had Image conscious. A lot of these guys were not the good looking dudes, man.
Christopher Cross, like he's not.
Christopher Cross, him. Donald Fagen, these guys were these guys were not good looking dudes.
I mean, he was selling weed, financed pretty much the beginning, his first album, which then went to win Grammys. He beat Barbra Streisand out at a Grammy.
Yeah,
look at this dude, he's from Austin, Texas, and he's just
little
like
Winnie the Pooh looking dude.
Yeah, I mean, like again, but that's the beauty part about this stuff is that Image was not a part of it, and it didn't matter. It was just what they're putting down on record, and that's the way it should be. And again, that's why Steely Dan is the godfather of this, because those guys, you look at pictures of those guys and you're
not
like,
good looking.
Whoa, it doesn't matter what they look like, what they put down on the
bunch
record.
Of computer
that's
nerds.
All that matters. So next week, what are we watching, Jay?
We are going to watch a story near and dear to my heart. You get a mistress. She turned out to be psycho. The Untold, the murder of Steve McNair.
Always
football player.
Yes, very
quarterback,
sad.
Steve McNair.
Sad story. His story, gone way too long or way too early. And
that's what happens when you pick up chicks at
don't be spilling the tea too
Dave
early.
and Buster's.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, wait till you see
this one. You'll be spilling the candy. As always, we do this live on YouTube or Facebook every Thursday at 9 a.m. We play it during my show at the same time, or Jay's show at 6 p.m., or you can download this thing as a podcast for free on our 104.7 The Cave app. I am Mike the Intern. That's Jay Stevens reminding you we watch movies,
documentaries,
so you don't have to. Dark Side of the Stream on 104.7 The Cave.